Hi everyone, this is International Master Mark Deason. The topic for our lecture tonight is going to be winning against e4 with the Marshall attack. And tonight we're going to be examining a game between Smirnin and Grischuk. This game, I think, is a high-level game between two very strong grandmasters and illustrates the possibilities of a relatively quick victory for Black, even against a high-powered opposition. So without further ado, we'll start out with the moves. The Marshall attack is a famous surprise weapon that was sprung by the game Capablanca Marshall, New York, 1918. Marshall tried a different tact later than the modern flavor, but I'll explain what I mean when we get there. All this is normal through Lopez. This is White's usual try for an advantage. And White is hoping to build a big pawn center supported by c3. That's what White's hoping for. And now Black castles. That's a bit of a significant move. If we see Black play d6, then Black is giving up on the idea of the Marshall gambit, and we know that Black is going to go into the main lines of the closed Sicilian. Not a bad choice either. But with castles, Black is retaining the possibility of the Marshall gambit, and the Marshall gambit has a very strong theoretical reputation. So White allows the Marshall gambit. It's become quite trendy to avoid the Marshall with moves like a4, even d4 can be attempted. I've personally had some luck with d4, or another trendy move is h3. But these are all anti-Marshall attempts by White. They don't really seem to offer White a huge theoretical advantage, though, but they're just ways to avoid the Marshall. But c3 had been is the main move, really. And now Black plays the Marshall gambit. White is forced to accept, and White is pretty much forced to, at this point, to go into the gambit. Now, the stem game for the whole variation, Black played knight f6, and this was in the game Capablanca Marshall, and lost a very interesting battle. But the current focus is on the move c6. Black keeps the knight located on a powerful central location, and he gets a kingside attack for his pawn. And frequently Black gains the two bishops as well. But in this game we'll get to see some interesting play after c6. Now White is usually choosing between d3 and d4. Both moves are quite reasonable. Or of course White could just immediately retreat the rook to e2 or e1. But in this game White goes for I guess what could be considered the main line. The rook has to go back. The queen enters the attacking area, forced to prevent queen h2. And now White plays rook e4. Now this is a very interesting move. The rook operates along the flank, and it's quite annoying for Black. The purpose of the move is to dislocate the queen out of the attacking post on h3. Just to show you the obvious, bishop f5 is a terrible move because of rook h4. So there's plenty of bad moves, but rook e4 is quite an important theoretical move. White can also just play into the so-called main line. I'm just showing you this so you know. But this is sort of a main line. You could almost call this a Spassky variation, and black seems to score fairly well from this position as well. That's another approach entirely for white. Rook e4 is a very interesting reaction, and has been played by a number of times by a lot of strong players. Now, black plays the very interesting move g5 in response to rook e4. Now bishop takes pawn. It becomes pretty much impossible because of queen to f5 with a fork. So, and that denies white is being denied the move rook h4 at the cost of a possible weakening of the pawn structure that black may incur by playing at g5. And now we get to an interesting point in the game. There's a lot of moves attempted here. Sometimes white tries queen f1, sometimes white tries queen f3. I would say queen f3 was sort of the older main move. And white is also, in more recent times, has been trying queen to e2. So, and not to mention the fact that white could simply just play knight to d2 and defer the decision of where to put the queen. But I think up till queen f3 had been sort of the main move, and the idea was more or less an exchange sacrifice by white for some compensation. But in this game, white tries a new approach, which also looks interesting, but black proves that his better development is a pretty much a game-winning situation. Now black plays f5. Now it looks like white dominates the e-file, and white has this beautiful pin on the knight on d5. So everything is looking good for white optically, but there's a lot of there are problems under the surface here for white. Black has ideas like f4 and f3, or f4 and f takes g3 with a powerful attack on the f-file, and white has just a lot of undeveloped pieces. So white has to play with great care. The critical line here is just necessary to play to throw in the move bishop takes knight and then rook e6. That's just absolutely essential, and with somewhat of an unclear position. But just to show you how sharp this position can be and how effective it can be, the position it can be for black, white plays rook e6, which white's probably thinking that's a harmless transposition to the variation we just discussed. And now black takes, gets his king out of the way, h8, and we're sitting here on move 18, and I think we're looking at a lost position for white already, and it's really white's absence of development is what kills him. Black's really threatening to play f3, in two moves, and he's also threatening to dominate the e-file and possibly threaten rook to e1 check. And white just doesn't have any effective counter to the combination of those two threats. So even one of the very extremely strong grandmasters on move 18 is totally busted in this opening. White tries to collect some material, hoping that there'll be some miracle miracle save, but there really isn't one. So black dominates the open E file. That's a typical theme in this opening. White's way ahead in material, but it doesn't really matter. White plays bishop d2, which stops the rook entry, but that's just not enough to stem the tide. Black plays f4, and now white has to worry about f3 and queen g2 mate. And white plays a few more moves which really don't change anything. He finally takes knight on d5. It's just too late at this point. Queen takes pawn that was not played in the game but would be met by f3. Game over. White tried to play f3, thinking that he's desperately trying to get his pieces into the game. Knight a3, rook f1, get some pieces, gain some traction in the game, if you will. There's a whole bunch of scary-looking, really scary-looking moves here for black can try. The only thing that black has to avoid is rook e2 would be a horrible blunder because of queen takes rook mate, so don't fall into that trap. But black comes up with, this is not a difficult shot for a 2700 player to find, but g4 is a winning idea. You're threatening to completely open up the king side and establish a pawn on f3, and at that point white can resign with a clear conscience. And indeed, white did resign. We can look at a few typical moves and convince ourselves that the position is hopeless. But after g4, white resigned. If pawn takes pawn, f3 cannot be answered because of the threat of mate. No answer to that. If pawn takes pawn, and again there's no answer to the g-file threat of mate on g2. Bishop takes f4, loosens control of the back rank, and then allows black to an easy checkmate. So a top flight grandmaster loses a miniature against the Marshall attack. Not suggesting that black has a win in the Marshall attack, but of course it's kind of interesting. The database statistics are so robust for black, showing nearly a 50% result for black in the Marshall Gambit. This is one of the openings that Kasparov always went to great pains to avoid. When Kasparov is white, interesting to observe such a thing. Top opening analyst not allowing this. Fischer always accepted the challenge, but Kasparov would always play something like h3 instead of c3 to avoid the Marshall and get some kind of anti-Marshall system. But the anti-Marshall systems don't seem to offer white a huge advantage. We may even see the day when anti-Marshall is considered the main line. Maybe that day has already arrived. Maybe it's just accepted now that the Marshall is so effective that white has to avoid it, if you will. And what we're talking about is all the way back at the point where white selected c3. But in any event, what a convincing win for black in only 22 moves. So, and we give a hearty congratulations to Grischuk, who applied this opening with great skill, and our condolences to Smirnin. And once again, would like to stress that this is a very difficult opening to play against, and highly recommendable to include in your repertoire. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight, and have a great evening. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to see you next week.